Martin was the president of NOW, and she had been doing some writing in the newspaper about gay and lesbian people not having protection under the law in public accommodations, housing, and education, and that, you know, that people needed that kind of protection, that there was discrimination going on. We had Human Relations Commission. It was a county Human Relations Commission. It was not required by law to have a county Human Relations Commission. It was just Lancaster that did that. And they did that to give people better access, particularly people, I think people of color. It was still coming off of all of the growth that had gone on in rights of people of color. And so, at any rate, City Council started kind of looking at what Linda was writing, is my understanding. At least what they presented was Human Relations Commission had started the commission, but they never had enforcement powers. And so what they wanted was enforcement powers, so they had to go to the county and the city, because the city was a municipality especially, to get enforcement powers. And that meant they had to open the books and in the Human Relations Code. The City Council saw it as an opportunity to try and get a change in the Human Relations Code, in the Human Relations Ordinance, that would grant protection from discrimination because of people's bias toward gay or lesbian people in housing, public accommodations, employment,
and
education. Yeah. And so they invited Linda to come up and speak to that at a city council meeting, and she called me. She met me and she said, you know, you can talk from the gay and lesbian side, I can do the women's side, because she wanted familial status also in there. And so we went to city council, and we each got up and we made a speech. She had done hers, and I was up there speaking, and as I finished my speech, I think it was Ingrid Rua that said, well, I think we just should pass an ordinance that allows for no discrimination in these areas. And somebody immediately said, well, I second that. And I turned around to Linda and I said, what just happened? And she goes, I don't know, just keep going. So we just let the thing run. And it ran into a lot of chaos. It became a really tough period of time here in Lancaster. And it was just craziness. Progressives, there's always been a great light of progressiveness here in Lancaster, but it's always been a thin light sometimes. You have to look for it because you get overshadowed by all this other kind of very kind of conservative values and so we started rallying people to come to the Human Relations Commission meetings, to go to Lancaster City Council. They had put up for first reading the passage of this amendment of the Human Relations Code, and so there was a period of time that they had to have more readings, they had a lot of meetings and all that kind of thing. And we were trying to rally people to come around and get involved, and that's where Pink Triangle Coalition came in, as I remember it. I remember a group of people that used to go to the Tally Ho because there were people being beaten up when they came out of the bar, or knifed in one case. I remember going to the Tally Ho one night and rabble-rousing people to come to the ordinance thing, and just so excited, so hopeful that something was really important going to happen here. And I went home and I got a call from a detective, and I don't know if you even know this story. And this detective called me and he said, you know, Reverend Merriman, something had happened tonight. It was over in Mustard Park, and he said it was about 8:30 tonight. And so what happened? Well, apparently somebody, a young man, had taken a shotgun and blown his head off. And it was all while we were at the same time rallying people to stand up and to be whole in this thing and to respond to things and not let things come internalized. But he had internalized, and he said, his mom doesn't want anything. He said, but I think you should have this. And so he gave me the suicide note, a copy of the suicide note. And I don't remember exactly. She didn't want it talked about, and I really wanted to respect that, but she wanted somebody to know about it, and she wanted me to know about it because we've been so open. And in that note, the young man was about 23, 26 years old, as I remember. He used to cross-dress, as they called it at that time. And, you know, I don't know that he was pre-operative, transgender, there was a few people going through surgeries, or what. But I know that he cross-dressed off and on, and he took on a lot of beatings for that. He also, in this note, talked about being arrested in one of the Justice of the Peace's office and being back there a couple of times, and the justice harassing him, calling him names, making his life pretty difficult. And I never knew anything about it. I don't think we'd ever heard the story. And she just said, there's nothing that we can do about it. He's gone. But I want you to know it. And so I kept that for a long time. There was a lot of bloodshed in that year, in many different ways. There had been people that had gone off the roof of parking garages. We had those stories for years. The bookstore was blown up a couple times that year. Ultimately, the Klan came to town. We had all kinds of different protests and things going on. There were a lot of coalition building at that time going on because some of the more progressive members in the community had gotten together. A few of the pastors that were progressive had joined together to form Unity Coalition, especially when the Klan announced coming to town and marching and things like that. And that became more sources of strength, but also sources of conflict with one another. Ultimately, the ordinance got passed, but in that process, we also lost our church home, because after the bookstore was bombed, the owners of the place where we were at Langston Metaphysical Chapel became really afraid, and they said, we can't have you here. So we're homeless again, and I think that's when we got to Friends Meeting House, where we were for 2 years. And 2 years that were good, until they needed the space and we were back on the street again. I think what happened was the ordinance itself was passed, but how it was going to be taken care of became an entirely different conflict. Ultimately, what happened was that the county commissioners, the Human Relations Commission was involved in this stuff. The director of the Human Relations Commission was involved. At one point, he and I were standing in front of one of the other commissioners on the city councilman, and I remember the director of the Human Relations Commission turning around to me and saying, "What are you doing this for? You don't have any right to have rights yet. You haven't shed enough blood." And I almost fell over. I couldn't believe somebody would say that. And say it openly, but he didn't say it to a mic. The council member turned around, and he was an African-American man, and said to him, "I think it's time that we end the bloodshed, and I think you need to stop right now." And it was just